Hey everybody, it's LavenderTowne, and I hope you're somewhere cozy and safe because today I'm going to be reading and illustrating SUN Daycare, a creepypasta by Chelsea Adams 524. I hope you enjoy. Just a few miles outside my town stood an old country house. It had been converted into a daycare where parents would drop off their kids in the morning and pick them up in the evening. However, said daycare had been out of business for a few years now. There was a sign posted in the front yard just a few feet from the house that read, SUN Daycare, with a cute-looking cartoony sun painted on it. Within the fenced-off backyard stood playground equipment that had fallen into disrepair and begun to rust. A slide, a couple swing sets, some monkey bars, and a merry-go-round were once covered by swarms of children as they ran and played in the outdoors. They had since become perches for the local birds and squirrels and were swarmed by ants rather than children. I had decided to write a report on the SUN Daycare for the news blog I worked for. For one thing, several people around today had gone to that daycare. I figured it might make for an interesting story to read about their experiences there and if it affected their later life in any way. The other reason wasn't quite so innocent. There had always been concerned parents who would fret over leaving their child in someone else's care. And I had heard rumors about some unspecified controversy. Worst case, it would end up a puff piece, a simple retrospective of a local business that didn't last, but I was hoping there would be something to the mutterings of the rumor mill. For my report, I decided I would interview both employees and people who had gone to the daycare as children. I wanted to get as many different points of view as possible so that it wouldn't seem too terribly biased. Of course, I agreed not to use real names for the sake of privacy. The first person I interviewed was a middle-aged woman who looked after the infants at the daycare. For the sake of her privacy, we'll just call her Margaret. "What was it like working at the daycare?" I asked her. She replied, "Oh, it wasn't anything too spectacular, just your typical day of working with children, or babies in my case." "I see," I said before I asked, "Have you ever had any problems while working there?" Margaret shook her head. "With the babies? Of course not. I'm just glad I was in the baby room." This piqued my interest. "Why might that be?" I asked. "Well," Margaret paused for a second, as though she was apprehensive about speaking to me. "They could be a handful. The children, always running around and getting hurt. They needed a lot of discipline. Babies were easier." "Did you ever see any children get hurt?" Margaret nodded. "Yes, but the parents would really overreact. Rowdy kids get scrapes and bruises, that's just part of growing up. I'm sure you've heard things about the daycare's past, but really, a couple bites weren't enough to shut down a daycare back then." I bit the edge of my cheek, trying to stay neutral. I couldn't help but feel this attitude about the kids' injuries was a bit too relaxed. Bites? I hadn't heard about that. Were there animals in the area? I decided to ask. Or were the kids biting each other? "There might have been a dog roaming around the area." Margaret shook her head. I pointed out, "A wild dog biting a kid would cause some alarm typically." "Oh, I only heard the dog," she told me, backtracking. I had never actually seen it. I sometimes heard a barking sort of noise or a growl, probably just kids playing, and besides, I was always in the baby room. She was distancing herself from the story as much as possible, and I felt the interview coming to a close, whether I wanted it to or not. Still, I had to learn more about the daycare. With the possibility of a cover-up regarding a series of injured children, I figured the next person to interview would be a former attendee. Perhaps one of them would have childhood memories that could potentially shed some light on what Margaret had mentioned. After doing some background checks, I managed to find a young man who went to SUN Daycare when he was around 5 or 6. Let's just call him Scott. I found Scott working at a local butcher's shop. I had to wait until his shift was over before I could start the interview. Luckily, it wasn't too long of a wait, and it gave me some time to consider what to ask him. "Do you remember anything about SUN Daycare?" I asked. I know it was a long time ago. Scott thought for a moment before replying. "Not much. I was only 5, maybe 6 when I went. I remember just doing what kids do at that age. Playing, finger painting, watching cartoons, that kind of stuff." I nodded. "Were you a good kid?" I was mostly being playful. "For the most part," he admitted. Occasionally, I'd get into some trouble. Nothing too serious, though, just your usual typical kid fussiness. You know, not wanting to take naps, refusing to eat veggies, that sort of thing. I see, I replied as I wrote down what he told me. And was the daycare fair in how they disciplined you? Somewhat. All I ever got was a scolding and the occasional timeout. They made you sit in a corner for a few minutes until you felt you were ready to join the other kids. I was puzzled. The comment Margaret had made about the kids needing a lot of discipline and the injuries was not adding up. So you never experienced discipline more serious than a timeout? I asked one last time. At this, he paused. Well, I was one of the good kids, Scott pointed out. It struck me as ominous, the way he said it, and my hope for my story returned. What exactly do you mean? For a brief moment, Scott sort of paused. For a moment, I could see what he must have looked like as a kid, his eyes wide and watery, his aquiline nose still flecked with freckles. The kids who got into real trouble were sent into the gray room. Scott heaved a heavy sigh. I had never been there myself. Ones that would get into fights or throw huge tantrums, they'd end up going into that room. I don't know what happened in there, but they'd always come out shaking, different. A few would break down crying, some would scream, one kid even threw up. Did the children have any scratches or bites on them? I asked. And did you hear any strange noises? He nodded. I did hear some heavy breathing. That could have just been some kid panting from running around in there. They were never very hurt, just a little scratched up. Hard to say for sure. I thanked Scott for taking the time to speak with me before moving on to the next person to interview. With my curiosity regarding the gray room still heightened, I figured the next person to speak to should be one of the more troublemaking attendees of the daycare. I had to know more about what went on inside that room. I managed to track down a young woman who we'll refer to as Alice. She had been arrested 2 weeks ago for spraying graffiti and was charged with vandalism. Rather than spend time in jail, she agreed to do 4 months of community service. It wasn't the first time she'd gotten in trouble with the law. Were you always this much trouble? I asked her. Alice laughed. Not a great way to start your interview, she said, then shrugged. Maybe. I need to know about Happy Sun Daycare, I asked her. Do you remember anything about the gray room? For a brief second, a hint of fear flashed in her eyes. Her face became pale, and a few beads of sweat trickled down her forehead. That was a long time ago, Alice said, her easy smile gone. I replied, Records show you were about 10 when you attended. Anything you remember? Alice took a few deep breaths and began to regain her composure. Okay, but don't tell anyone I told you this. I reassured her. I won't reveal any names. That will be strictly confidential. I was playing outside in the playground, she began to explain. I remember wanting to play on the swings. Another kid claimed he'd already gotten first dibs to play on them. Before I knew it, we were having a big argument. I lost control. The next thing I knew, he was on the ground crying. I must have pushed him when we were arguing. One of the teachers came up and grabbed me by the arm and dragged me inside. She told me I would be taken into the gray room as punishment. What was inside the room? I asked. Alice took a deep breath, shuddering. The room was mostly empty. I remember the floor was nothing but dirt ground, and the only light was a dingy old light bulb that barely lit anything up. The teacher just shoved me in and slammed the door shut. At first, I tried pounding on the door and screaming. I cried out for anyone to open it. It was so dark and cold, and I was so scared. There was no knob on the inside, no way to open it. And then I heard something behind me. I turned around and I remember screaming. I frowned. What did you see? It was a dog, or I think it was a dog. She choked back tears. I didn't get a good look at it since it was so dark. Right when my eyes would almost adjust, I would see this bright flash. All I remember was that it was huge. That thing had glowing yellow eyes, huge sharp teeth, and it was covered in black shaggy fur. And before I knew it, it snarled and it lunged at me. I ran as fast as I could in the tiny space, screaming and begging for someone to come and save me. It grabbed onto me with its teeth and tried to pull me towards it. I tripped and fell, but managed to kick it in the face a couple times to get it to let go. Then it lunged at me again. Luckily for me, the door finally opened and one of the teachers pulled me out of the room and slammed the door shut before the dog could get me. So it was a dog after all. The stories were starting to come together. Margaret's story about hearing screams and growling, Scott's story about horrified kids who had been sent to the grey room, and now there was Alice's story about being sent to that room and being attacked by some sort of large vicious dog. But logically it didn't add up. A vicious dog would have put those kids in the hospital. Someone else would have seen or heard it. Could they really have kept it trapped in that tiny room? I thanked Alice for her time and asked who she thought I should talk to next. She paused, with no particular affinity for most of the adults who worked at that place, the place that left her with such bad memories. There was only one, a janitor who worked at the daycare. We'll call him Mr. Smith. She said he would always comfort the kids who had been sent to the grey room, that he was nice and cool, the first adult she'd ever seen with piercings or green hair. Mr. Smith had moved to another town since the daycare closed years ago. That meant I couldn't interview him in person, so we sent each other emails instead. I asked him some preliminary questions, getting a sense of him. He seemed a little embarrassed about his green hair, which he confirmed used to be his color, though in his later years he stopped maintaining. It seems the kids really liked him. When he said he would try to be there for the more mischievous kids, I had my in. I asked if he knew anything about the tiny, empty room and the children being attacked by some sort of dog. Another couple days passed before I got another response from Mr. Smith. I opened the reply and began to read. He said that he didn't remember any kind of dog at the daycare. In fact, he pointed out that animals were not allowed on the property and that he would set traps to keep the squirrels and the mice out. His aunt was very strict about no pets being allowed as well. Most likely it was due to potential allergies kids might have. He suggested that, if I was curious, I might check out the building myself, that it had good bones and was likely safe to explore despite being abandoned the last few years. I sent one last email to Mr. Smith thanking him for taking the time to reply to my messages. The whole thing about Happy Sun Daycare still wasn't sitting right with me. There was only one thing left to do. Mr. Smith was right. I was going to head inside Happy Sun Daycare and investigate the infamous grey room for myself. I had to see if there was anything that could solve this strange mystery. It was a 25-minute drive out to the countryside and towards the abandoned building. I parked the car in the front driveway and took a couple of deep breaths. The front door was unlocked, which was lucky for me. I gently pushed it open and began to look inside. The interior was dingy and covered in a layer of dust. Cobwebs spread over various desks, and the chairs hadn't been used in quite some time. A musty smell filled the house and mixed with the odor of feces and urine from the rats that now made the place their home. It was nauseating, to say the least. After I explored several different areas, I soon found the foreboding gray door that was said to lead to the dreaded room. The door was quite heavy, and it took me several tries before I managed to force it open. Just like Alice had described, the room was dark and empty, with a dirt floor and a dingy bulb. Said bulb had burned out long ago, so I used an old desk to prop the door open in order to see anything. I could see faint bloodstains on the ground and on the wall. There were strange markings there too. I took a closer look and could have sworn they resembled claw marks of some sort. As I continued to examine the room, I noticed a strange shadow at the far wall. My phone didn't have service out here, but the flashlight still worked, so I turned it on. In the dusty beam of light, I saw the seam of a wall panel slightly out of place. I dug my fingernails under it, and it popped open with a shower of dust. Inside lay a rubber wolf mask, its matted, fuzzy exterior smelling strongly of sweat. The only other thing in the compartment was a pile of shiny little squares, Polaroids, extreme close-ups of terrified children, hundreds of photos with their tear-streaked faces. Inside the wolf mask, a single hair, dyed bright green. I am ashamed to say that in that moment, all I felt was a surge of excitement, thinking about what this find meant for my story. The betrayal, the terrorizing of children who trusted him, the answer to this strange riddle. All that went away, of course, when the door behind me slammed shut. Even without moving my light, I knew the wolf was in there with me, and he wasn't going to let this story out. I hope you guys enjoyed my reading and illustration of Happy Sun Daycare, a creepypasta by Chelsea Adams 524. I will say I made quite a few changes to this one, altering the ending, so if you'd like to read the original, it'll be linked in the description. Thank you so much for listening, and stay safe out there, guys. All I'd ever experienced was the occasional growl, snowl. Snowl? Thank you so much to my patrons and members, including Pale Star, Darkholder, Frog Scourge, Zucchini, Zio Reyes, The Main PC, Esther Kaufman, Sopapia, Roger Baker, Pretty Little Head Poppy Seed, Heichol, Neko Mori, Trexa Panda, Lucian, Lonely Zealot, Novel Goblin, The Mousy Mouse, Clown of Clubs, Prince Piplip III, I'm a Potato, Honey Kitten, Loro, Data, Lily McFarlane, Skitten, Gold Pikachu. The names are gone, Crodotus, Rectangle, Blanket of Misery, Moves Like Platinum, Sunday Good Enough, Ace Water, Jordan, Clown of Clubs, Jeffu, Sunshine, River the Goblin, Raz Taroche, Casey, Graveyard Moss, Grexius, Emma Lightning, The Midwestern Menace, CB, Lucy Yamajiki, Ravenscrow, Zocelot, Jabber Dabber Doo, Light Julie, Kadaria, The Expressive Poker Face, Tsubaki, Cutie Pie, Ice Cream Pal, Cola, JJ Jade, and of course, Blah 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 Blah.